Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. How are you doing tonight? I've taken a few days off, actually about 4 days. Maybe a Sunday was the last day, so it's been about 3 or 4 days I've taken off. What we're going to do tonight is going to be sharing another particular chapter 7 in Amusing Ourselves to Death. Um, I'm seeing, pictures of young kids with their little Walkman and their phone. Some kids have their own phone at, 8 or 9 years old, which is just really not good, folks. Just not good. And I see kids that are in the supermarket, grocery store locally, and the parents give their phone or whatever this little mini thing they've got in their hands, and the kids are mesmerized by it. That's not a good thing to do, neither, folks. Really isn't. Um, you need to teach them how to read. You need to teach them how to write. You need to teach them how to talk, speech. And it seems as though parents, well, the problem is parents don't have time because simply as they are super busy, you see. So I did a book. I want to just reemphasize a book that you guys got to look into my video with Nikki Rapano. What she's sharing is so real, folks, dealing with communitarianism. Um, and I don't know if people are going to be aware, it just or whatever. I hope that as the days continue as they are, things are going to start getting rough here in this country, folks. Really are. I have been watching a couple of videos by a lady who's talking about the digital dollar. Folks, they're not that far away from that right now. They're already practicing with it since November. I remember seeing the article in the paper, and they're doing it with, some probably 7 or 8 banks. One is actually a Canadian bank. I think the other one is an English bank, England. But anyway, I'm kind of got off the subject here. So I just want to start reading this book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. I know that people just have an issue today. They're not able to sit down and listen to even classical music anymore. They don't have the wherewithal to just sit and enjoy the music in itself. And this is part of the reason why people are jumping all over the place because there's so many channels, so to speak. Whatever. I listen to this, listen to that, listen, that type of thing. So this is chapter 7. Now this. The American humanist H. Allen Smith once suggests that of all the worrisome words in the English language, the scariest is "uh-oh," and as when a physician looks at your X-rays and when a knitted brow says "oh-oh." I should like to suggest that the words which are the title of this chapter are as ominous as any, all the more so because they are spoken without needle brow, indeed, with a kind of idiot delight. The phrase, if that what it may be called, adds to our grammar a new part of speech, a conjunction that does not connect anything to anything, but does the opposite. It separates everything from everything. As such, it serves as a compact metaphor for the discontinuous from the continuousness in so much that passes for public discourse in present day America. Yeah, I find it really odd that you cannot even talk with people. They really basically are not glued in or not in time, looking at you, and you just feel like, okay, just move on. These people are not here. So continue on, paragraph 2 here. Now, this is commonly used on radio and television newscasts to indicate that what one has just heard or seen has no relevance to what one is about to hear or see, or possibly to anything one is ever likely to hear or see. The phrase is a means of acknowledging the fact that the world, as mapped by the speed up electronic media, has no order or meaning as not to be taken seriously. There is no murder so brutal, no earthquake so devastating, no political blunder so costly for that matter, no ball score so tantalizing or weather report so threatening that it cannot be erased from our minds by a newscaster saying, and now this, from our sponsor usually. Newscaster means that you have You have thought long enough on the previous matter, approximately 45 seconds, that you must not be morbidly preoccupied with it, let's us say for 90 seconds, and that you must now give your attention to another fragment of news or a commercial. You see how that is a split type of deal? Television did not invent the now this world view, as I have tried to show. It is the offspring of the intercourse between telegraphic and phonographic, but it is through television that has been nurtured and brought to a perverse maturity. For on television, nearly every half hour is a discrete event, separating content, context, and emotional texture from what precedes and follows it. It's very jugular. It's fragmented, you see. That's my words. In part because television sells its times in seconds and minutes, you see. In part because television must use images rather than words, you see. In part because its audience can move freely to and from the television set. Programs are structured so that almost every 8-minute segments may stand as a complete event in itself. Viewers are rarely required to carry over any thought or feelings from one parcel of time to another. Of course, in television presentations of the news of the day, you may see now this mode of discourse in the boldest and most embarrassing form. Well, there we are presented not only with fragmented news, but news without context, without consequences, without value, and therefore without essential seriousness. That is to say, news as pure entertainment. Consider, for example, how you would proceed if you were given the opportunity to produce a television news show for any station concerned to attract the largest possible audience. You would first choose a cast of players, each of whom has a face that is both likable and credible. Those who apply would in fact submit to you their 8x10 glossaries, from which you would eliminate those whose countenance are not suitable for nightly display. This means that you will exclude women who are not beautiful or who are not over the age of 50, men who are bald, all people who are overweight, or whose noses are too long, or whose eyes are too close together. You will try, in other words, to assemble a cast of talking hairdos. That's right, hairdos. At the very least, you will want those whose faces would not be unwelcome on a magazine cover. Christine Craft has just such a face, and so she applied for a co-anchor position on KMBC TV in Kansas City. According to a lawyer who represented her in a sexualism suit she later brought against the station, the management of KMBC TV loved Christine's look. She was accordingly hired in January of 1981, but she was fired in August of 1981 because research indicated that her appearance hampered viewers' acceptance. What exactly does hamper viewers' acceptance mean? And what does it have to do with the news? Hamper view acceptance means the same thing for television news as it does for any television show. Viewers do not like looking at the performer. It also means that the viewers do not believe the performer, that she lacks credibility. In this case of a theatrical performance, we have a sense of what that implies. The actor does not persuade the audience that he or she is the character being portrayed. But what does lack of credibility imply in the case of a news show? What character is a co-anchoring playing? And how do we decide that the performance lacks verisimilitude? Does the audience believe that the newscaster is lying? That what is reported did not in fact happen? That something important is being concealed? It is frightening to think that this may be so, that the perception of the truth of a report rests heavily on the acceptability of the newscaster. In the ancient world, there was a tradition of banishing or killing the bearer of bad tidings. Does the television news show restore, in a curious form, this tradition? Do we banish those who tell us the news when we do not care for the face of the teller? Does television countermand the warnings we once received about the fallacy of the ad hominem argument? If the answer to any of these questions is even a qualified yes, then here is an issue worthy of the attention of epistemologists. Stated in the simplest form, it is that television provides a new or possibly restores a old definition of truth. The credibility of the teller is the ultimate test of the truth of a proposition. Credibility here does not refer to a past record of the teller from making statements that had survived the rigors of reality testing. It refers only to the impression of sincerity, authenticity, vulnerability, or attractiveness, choose one or more, conveyed by the author or, sorry, not the author, but the actor or the reporter. This is a matter of considerable importance, where it goes beyond the question of how true is perceived on television news shows. If on television credibility replaces reality as the decisive test of truth-telling, political leaders need not trouble themselves very much with reality, provided that their performances consistently generate a sense of verisimilitude. I suspect, for example, that the dishonor that now shrouds Richard Nixon results not from the fact that he lied, but that on television he looked like a liar, you see, which, if true, should bring no comfort to anyone, not even veteran Nixon haters, you see. But the alternative possibilities are that one may look like a liar but be telling the truth, or even worse, look like a truth teller but in fact being a liar. As a producer of television news shows, you would be well aware of these matters and would be careful to choose your cast on the basis of criteria used by David Merrick, M-E-R-R-I-C-K, and other successful impresarios. Like them, you would then turn your attention to staging the show on principles that maximize entertainment value. You would, for example, select a musical theme for the show, you see. All television news programs begin, in, and are somewhere in between punctuated with music. I have found very few Americans who regard this custom as peculiar, which fact I have taken as evidence for the dissolution of lines of demarcation between serious public discourse and entertainment, you see. What has music to do with the news? These are good questions, folks. Why is it there? Is it there? I assume for the same reason music is used in the theater of films, to create a mood, to provide a leitmotif, or the entertainment. See, it's entertainment, you see. That's my words. If there was no music, as in the case when any television program is interrupted for a news flash, viewers would expect something truly alarming, possibly life-altering. But as long as that music is there as a frame for the program, the viewer is comforted to believe that there's nothing to be greatly alarmed about. That in fact, the events that are reported have as much relation to reality as do scenes in a play. Like Act 1, Act 2, you see? This perception of news show as a stylized, dramatic performance whose content has been staged largely to entertain is reinforced by several other features, including the fact that the average length of any story is only 45 seconds, folks. While brevity does not always suggest triviality, in this case, it clearly does. And we know, I'm jumping now, here's the point. We know in my age, I'm 62, that the people have a hard time concentrating and being able to listen anymore because they've listened to so much television that they've been taught how that, so many seconds, and then they become bored. They're not able to follow what is being taught. And with that means simply is you've got a problem because that means they cannot logically think on their own. That's why things are almost spoon-fed, so to speak. It's simply not possible to convey a sense of seriousness about any event, and if any implications are exhausted in less than 1 minute's time. In fact, it's quite obvious that TV news has no intention of suggesting that any story has any implications, for that would require viewers to continue to think about it when it is done, and therefore obstruct their attention to the next story, you see. Waits painting in the wings. In any case, viewers are not provided with much opportunity to be distracted from the next story, since in all likelihood it would consist of some film footage Pictures have little difficulty in overwhelming words and short-circuiting introspection. As a television producer, you would be certain to give more prominence and procedure to any event for which there is some sort of visual documentation. A suspected killer being brought into a police station, the angry face of a cheated consumer, a barrel going over Niagara Falls with a person alleged to be in it, the president disembarking from a helicopter on the White House lawn. They're always fascinating or amusing and easily satisfy the requirements of an entertainment show. You see, it is, of course, not necessary that the visuals actually document the point of a story. Neither is it necessary to explain why such images are intruding themselves on public consciousness. Film footages justify itself, as every television producer well knows. It's also considerable help in maintaining a high level of unreality that the newscasters do not pause to grimace or shiver when they speak the prefaces of epilogue to the film clips. There's no feelings in it, folks. Indeed, many newscasters do not appear to grasp the meanings of what they're saying, and some hold to a fixed and integrated enthusiasm as they report on earthquakes, mass killings, and other disasters, you see. There's not even a pause in thinking of this, folks. That's my viewpoint. Viewers would be quite disconcerted by any show of concern on terror on a part of the newscasters. Viewers, after all, are partners with the newscaster in the now, this culture, and they expect the newscaster to play out his or her role as a character who marginally seriously, but who stays well clear of authentic understandings. The viewer, for their part, will not be caught contaminating their responses with a sense of reality any more than an audience at a play would go scurrying to call home because of a character or stage that said that a murder is loose in the neighborhood. The viewers also know that no matter how grave any fragment of news may appear, for example, on the day I write, a Marine Corps general has decided that nuclear war between the United States and Russia is inevitable. It will shortly be followed by a series of commercials that will, in its instant, diffuse the importance of the news. In fact, render it largely banal. This is a key, it's the element in the structure of news programs, and all by itself refutes any claim that television news is assigned as a serious form of public discourse. Imagine what you would think of me in this book if I were to pause here and tell you that I will return to my discussion in a moment, then proceed to write a few words on behalf of United Airlines or Chase Manhattan Bank. You will rightly think that I have no respect for you and certainly no respect for the subject. And if I did this not once but several times in each chapter, you would think the whole enterprise unworthy of your attention. Why then do we not think a news show similarly unworthy? Yeah, it's a good question. Very good question. The reason, I believe, is that whereas we expect books and even other media such as film to maintain a consistency of tone and a continuality of content, we have no such expectations on television, especially television news. We've become so accustomed to its discontinuities that we are no longer struck dumb as any sane person would be by a newscaster who, having just reported that a nuclear war is inevitable, goes on to say that he will be right back after the word from Burger King, who says, in other words, now this. One can hardly overestimate the damage such juxtapositions do to our sense of the world as a serious place. The damage is especially massive to youthful viewers who depend so much on television for their clues as to how to respond to the world. That's a really sad story there, folks. In watching television news, they more than any other segment of the audience are drawn into epistemology based on the assumption that all reports of cruelty and death are greatly exaggerated and in any case not to be taken seriously or responded to sanely. I would go so far as to say that embedded in the surrealism frame of a television news show is a theory of anti-communication, featuring a type of discourse that abandons logic, reason, sequence, and rules of contradiction. In aesthetics, I believe the name given to this theory is Dadaism. That's D-A-D-A-I-S-M. In philosophy, nihilism. In psychiatry, schizophrenia. In the parlance of the theater, it is known as vaudeville. But those who think I am here guilty of hyperbole, I offer the following description of television news by Robert Menil, a executive editor and co-anchor of the Menil-Lehrer News Hour. The idea, he writes, is to keep everything brief, not to strain the attention of anyone, but instead to provide constant stimulation through variety, novelty, and action and movement. The reason why I think about it is I remember this guy. I think this was on public broadcasting systems television when I was younger. You are required to pay attention to no concepts, no character, no problem for more than a few seconds at a time. He goes on to say that the assumptions controlling a news show are that bite size is best, that complexity must be avoided. You see, here's this whole idea when you see this is that they're teaching you, if your child is being taught by television, expecting to have these type of things in his life, and no wonder they're let down when they get older. They're like, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. You see, because everything on television seemed like it was just surreal or not real, you see. That uses are dispensable. The qualification impede the simple message that visual stimulation is a substitute for thought, and that verbal precision is an anachronism. Robert Menil has more reason than most to give testimony about the television news show as a vaudeville act. The Menil-Lehrer report, that is NewsHour, is an unusual and gracious attempt to bring to television some of the elements of typography discourse. Typography. The program abjures visual stimulation, consistent largely of extending explanations of events and in-depth interviews, which even there means only 5 to 10 minutes. Limits the number of stories covered, and emphasize background and coherence. But television has exactly its price for McNeil's rejection of a show business format. By television standards, the audience is minuscule. The program is confined to public television station, and it's a good guess that the combined salary of Menil-Lehrer is 1/5 of Dan Rather's or Tom Brokaw's news programs that is on CBS or NBC. So you see how this is, you see what he's pointing at here. Okay. If you were a producer of a television news show for a commercial station, you would not have the option to define television requirements. It would be demanded you that you strive for the largest possible audience, and as a consequence, and in spite of your best intentions, you would arrive at a production very nearly resembling McNeil's description. Moreover, you would include some things that McNeil does not mention. You would try to make celebrities on your newscasters. You would advertise the show, both in the press and on television itself. You would do news briefs to serve as an inducement to viewers. You would have a weatherman as comic relief and a sportscaster whose language is a touch uncouth as a way of his relating to a beer-drinking common man. You would have short packaged the whole event as any producer might who is in the entertainment business. The result of all this is that Americans are the best entertained and quite likely the least well-informed people in the Western world. I say this in the face of popular conceit that television as a window to the world has made Americans exceeding well-informed. Much depends here, of course, on what is meant by being informed. I will pass over that now tiresome polls that tells us that at any given moment, 70% of our citizens do not know who is the Secretary of State or the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Let us consider, instead, the case of Iran during the drama that was called the Iranian hostage crisis. Yeah, I remember that back in the 80s. I remember that ABC, but Ted Koppel was the one who did that, what we call a show because of dealing with the hostages. In fact, that's where eventually where we got a news network, the CNN News, Cable News Network. We may assume that the Americans know most of what there is to know about this unhappy event. And now I put those questions to you. Would it be exaggeration to say that not only American in 100 known what language the Iranians speak, or what the word Ayatollah means or implies, or knows any details of the tenets of Iranian religious beliefs on the main outlines of their political history, or knows who the Shah was and where he came from? Nevertheless, everyone has an opinion about this event. For in America, everyone is entitled to opinion, and it is certainly useful to have a few when a poster shows up, you see. But these are opinions of a quite different order from 18th or 19th century opinions, you see. It's probably more accurate to call them emotions rather than opinions, which would account for the fact that they change from week to week, as the pollsters tell us. What is happening here is that the television is altering the meaning of being informed by creating a species of information that might properly be called disinformation. I'm using this word almost in the precise scene in which is used by spies in the CIA or the KGB. Disinformation does not mean false information. It means misleading information, misplaced, irrelevant, fragmented, superficial information, information that creates the illusion of knowing something, but which in fact leads one way from one away from knowing. In saying this, I do not mean to imply that television news deliberately aims to deprive Americans of a coherent, contextual understanding of their world. I mean to say that when news is packaged as entertainment, that is the inevitable result. And in saying that a television news show entertains but does not inform, I'm saying something far more serious than that. We are being deprived of authentic information. I'm saying we are losing our sense of what it means to be well informed. Ignorance is always correctable. But what shall we do if we take ignorance to be knowledge? Here's a startling example of how this process bedevils us. A New York Times article is headlining February 15, 1983. Reagan misstatements getting less attention. This article begins in the following way. President Reagan's age used to become visible alarm as suggested that he had given mangled or perhaps misleading accounts of his policies or what we call current events in general. That doesn't seem to happen much anymore. Indeed, the president continues to make debatable assertions of fact, but news accounts do not deal with them as extensively as they once did. In the view of the White House officials, the declining news coverage mirrors a decline in interest by the general public, you see. This report is not so much a news story as a story about the news, and our recent history suggesting that it's not about Ronald Reagan's charm, it's about how news is defined. And I believe the story would be quite astonishing to both civil libertarians and tyrants of an earlier time. Walter Lippmann, for example, wrote in 1920, there can be no liberty for a community which lacks the means by which to detect lies. I'll say that again. Walter Lippmann's statement, a quote, there can be no liberty for a community which lacks the means by which to detect lies. For all of his pessimism about the possibilities of restoring an 18th and 19th century level of public discourse, Walter Lippmann has assumed, as did Thomas Jefferson before him, that with a well-trained press functioning as a lie detector, the public interest in a president mangling of the truth would be pilicate in both senses of that word, given the means to detect lies. He believed the public could not be indifferent to their consequences. But this case refutes his assumption. The reporters who covered the White House are ready and able to expose lies and thus create the grounds for informed and indignant opinion. But apparently the public declines to take an interest. You see, to press reports of White House dissimulating, the public has replied with Queen Victoria's famous line, "We are not amused." However, here the word means something that the Queen did not have in mind. They meant that what is not amusing does not compel their attention. Perhaps if the president lies could be demonstrated by pictures and accompanied by music, the public would raise a curious eyebrow. And a movie like All the President's Men could be made from his misleading accounts of government policy. If there were a break-in of some sort or sinister character laundering money, attention would quite likely be paid. We do well to remember that President Nixon did not begin to come undone until his lies were given a theatrical setting at the Watergate hearing. But we do not have anything like that here, you see. Apparently, all President Reagan does is to say things that are not entirely true, and there's nothing entertaining in that, folks. But there is a subtle point to be made here. Many of President's misstatements fall in the category of contradictions, mutually exclusive assertions that cannot possibly both in the same context be true. In the same context is a key phrase here, or is a context that defines contradictions. There is no problem in someone remarking that he prefers oranges to apple, or also remarking that he prefers apples to oranges. not if one statement is made in the context of choosing a wallpaper design and the other in the context of selecting fruit for dessert. In such a case, we have statements that are opposite, but not contradictory. But if the statements are made in a single continuous deal and coherent context, then they are contradictions and cannot both be true. Contradictions, in short, requires that statements and events be perceived as interrelated aspects of continuous and coherent context. Disappear the context or fragment it, and contradictions disappear. This point is nowhere made more clear to me in conference with my younger students about their writing. Look here, I say, in this paragraph you have said one thing, and in that you have said the opposite. Where is it to be? They are polite and wish to please, but they are also baffled by the question as I am by the response. I know they will say, but that is there, and this is here. The distance between us is that I assume there and here, now and then, one paragraph and the next to be connected, to be continuous, to be part of the same coherent world of thought. In other words, giving your ammunition to whatever you believe, your theory. That is the way of typographical discourse and typography is the universe I'm coming from, as they say, but they are coming from a different universe of discourse altogether. You see, this world of television, the fundamental assumption of that world is not coherence, but discontinuity. And in the worlds of discontinuities, contradiction is useless as a test of truth or merit because contradiction does not exist. My point is that we are by now so thoroughly adjusted to this world of news, a world of fragments where events stand alone, stripped of any connection to the past or to the future or to other events, you see, that all assumptions of coherence have vanished. And so perforce has contradiction. In the context of no context, so to speak, it simply disappears. And in its absence, what possibly interest could there be in the list of what the president says now and what he said then? It's merely a rehash of old news, and there is nothing interesting or entertaining in that, you see. The only thing to be amused about is the bafflement of reporters at the public indifference. There is a irony in the fact that the very group that has taken the world apart should, on trying to piece it together again, be surprised that no one notices much or cares. For all his perspicacity, George Orwell would have been stymied by this situation. There is nothing Orwellian about it. The president does not have the press under his thumb. The New York Times and the Washington Post are not Pravda. The Associated Press is not TASS. TASS, when I'm saying Pravda and TASS, those are communist newspapers in Russia, the Soviet Union. And there is no newspeak here. Lies have not been defined as truth, nor truth as lies. All that has happened in that the public has adjusted to incoherence and been amused into indifference, which is why Aldous Huxley would not in the least be surprised by the story, you see. Indeed, he prophesied it coming. He believed that it is far more likely that the Western democracy will dance and dream together into oblivion and march into it, single file and mannequin. Huxley grasped, as Orwell did not, that it is not necessary to conceal anything from a public insensible to contradiction or narcoticized by technological diversions. Although Huxley did not specifically specify that television would be our main line to the drug, you see, he would have no difficulty accepting Robert Munir's observation that is the summa of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Big brothers turn out to be howdy doody, you see. I do not mean that trivialization of public information is all accomplished on television. I mean that television is the paradigm for our conception of public information, as the printing press did in earlier times. Television has achieved the power to define the form in which news must come. And it has also defined how we shall respond to it. In presenting news to us packaged as vaudeville, television induces other media to do the same, so that the total information environment begins to mirror television. For example, America's newest and highly successful national newspaper, USA Today, is modeled precisely on that format of television. It's sold in the streets and receptacles that look like television sets. Its stories are uncommonly short, and design leans heavily on pictures, charts, and other graphics, some of them printed in various colors. I remember that. Well, remember this stuff, folks. Its weather maps are visual delight. Its sports section includes another pointless statistic to distract the computer. As a consequence, USA Today, which began publication in September of 1982, became the third largest daily in the United States as of July 1984, according to the Audit Bureau of Circulations, moving quickly to overtake the Daily News and the Wall Street Journal. Journalists of a more traditional bent had criticized it for superficiality and theatrics, but the paper's position remained steadfast in their disregard of typographical standards. The paper's editor-in-chief, John Quinn, has said, "We are not up to undertaking projects of the dimension needed to win prizes. They don't give awards for the best investigative paragraphs. Here is a stunning tribute to the resonance of television, its epistemology. In the age of television, the paragraph is becoming the basic unit of news in print media. Moreover, Mr. Quinn needs not fret too long about being deprived of awards, as other newspapers join in the transformation. The time cannot be far off when awards will be given for the best investigative sentence, not the story, but the sentence." It needs also to be noted here that new and successful magazines such as People and Us are not only examples of television-oriented print media, but have had an extraordinary ricochet effect on television itself. Whereas television taught the magazines that news is nothing but entertainment, the magazines have taught television that nothing but entertainment is news. You see, television programs such as Entertainment Tonight turns information about entertainers and celebrity into serious cultural contents, so that the circle begins to close. Both the form and content of news becomes entertainment. Radio, of course, is the least likely medium to join in the descent into the Huxley world of technological narcotics. It is, after all, particularly well suited to the transmission of rational, complex language. Nonetheless, and even if we disregard radio capability by the music industry, we appear to be left with the chilling fact that such language as a radio allows us to hear is increasingly primitive, fragmented, and largely aimed at invoking visceral response, which is to say, it is the linguist's analog to the ubiquitous rock music that in radio principal source of income. As I write, the trend in call-in shows is for the host to insult callers whose language does not in itself go much beyond humanoid grunting. Such programs have little context as this word used to be defined, and are merely archaeological interest in that they give us a sense of what a dialogue among Neanderthals might have been like. More to the point, though, the language of radio newscasters have become, under the influence of television, increasingly decontextualized and deconsensuous, so that the possibility of anyone knowing about the world as against merely knowing of it is effectively blocked. In New York City, radio station WINS entreats its leaders to give us 22 minutes and we'll give you the world. This is said without an irony, and its audience, we may assume, does not regard the slogan as a conception of disordered mind. But it is, isn't it? See, how can you expect to have any serious dialogue when you do this? And there's none. So they've dumbed down the message, you see. That's my point here. Continue. And so we must rapidly into an information environment which may rightly be called Trivial Pursuit. You remember that game back in the 80s? As the game of that name uses facts as a source of amusement, so do our sources of news, you see. It has been demonstrated many times that a culture can survive misinformation and false opinion. It has not yet been demonstrated whether a culture can survive if it takes the measure of the world in 22 minutes, or as the value of its news is determined by the number of laughs it provides. So that's chapter 7. As he's talking about simply amusing ourselves to death. And we're going to stop at this point. Hopefully everyone is doing well tonight. And so again, this is trying to intrigue you to see how this has been going on in my lifetime, but even before my lifetime, and how people are amused to death. In fact, I think sometimes people try to get amusement in order to find out if they still are alive. Thank you for being here. And again, that was from Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. By the way, I am on YouTube. Discerning What Is True. I am also on Facebook, and I'm also on Odyssey. So thank you for being here. Hope that this will help you to see your world clearly, as we have been completely, in a lot of ways, as Neil Postman is trying to point out, not only amused to death, but we've been dumbed down to the point we can't even logically think anymore, put sentences together. Thank you. Have a good night. Take care.